So the Supreme Court has given their personal opinion. Thanks for letting us know, guys. Really interesting. I'm glad you chimed in. Anyway, let's get back to deporting the illegal aliens.
In a shocking twist that nobody could have seen coming, internet political discourse is getting kind of unhinged. We're going to break down the latest controversial take from MAGA YouTube star Matt Walsh that's going viral, plus a woke mayor messes around and finds out, and a disturbing censorship case involving jail time over tweets in the United Kingdom. All this and so much more is coming up on today's episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast, my daily show where I take on the craziest ideas from across the internet, our media, and our politics, all from an independent perspective. Up first, like I've mentioned, we got to check in with Matt Walsh, the Daily Wire host who's perhaps best known for his honestly really interesting documentaries like What is a Woman and Am I Racist, but whose firebrand daily political commentary from a very right-wing perspective tends to make waves, and his episode yesterday is no exception because he went on a rant about the Supreme Court that made me raise my eyebrows many times. The context for this, guys, is that the Supreme Court is controlled by a Republican majority, including 3 justices actually appointed by Trump himself, and they just ruled in a narrow case about just the scope of a handful of deportations, that the Trump administration couldn't deport certain immigrants the way they were, doing so under the Alien and Enemies Act, an 18th century law that the Trump administration recently invoked, specifically to try to deport certain Venezuelan nationals who they accuse of being members of a gang. Here is Matt's initial analysis of the case. Let's take a listen.
The Supreme Court on Friday ruled 7-2 against the Trump administration's attempt to swiftly deport Venezuelan gang members under the Alien Enemies Act, requiring officials to provide more than 24 hours for detainees to challenge their removal. Under these circumstances, notice roughly 24 hours before removal, devoid of information about how to exercise due process rights to contest that removal, surely does not pass muster, the majority wrote. The unsigned decision clarified that the court was only ruling on the notice requirement and not whether the Trump administration can use the Alien Enemies Act itself. The court stated, to be clear, we decide today only that the detainees are entitled to more notice than was given on April 18th. So this is supposed to put a stop to Trump's deportation efforts. That's the idea anyway. And this is completely bogus. It's illegitimate. It's ridiculous.
So it's interesting how certain Matt seems here that this Supreme Court decision, brought to you by many of the same justices who overturned Roe v. Wade, remember, these are not liberal judges, is bogus and illegitimate. And the confidence with which he says that is really interesting because based on his initial reaction here and the very big factual inaccuracies and misunderstandings that he kind of repeats after reading the news, I would be willing to bet thousands of dollars that Matt Walsh did not actually open up and read the Supreme Court decision he is discussing. He just read maybe literally just the couple of paragraphs from this Daily Wire news article and made his conclusion based off of that. Because if he had read the actual Supreme Court decision or even just like any sort of detailed analysis about it, he would know that it absolutely does not and is not meant to put a stop to Trump's mass deportation efforts. This case only concerns procedural requirements for a few hundred immigrants the Trump administration is seeking to remove. So like less than a tiny fraction of 1% of all illegal immigrants. All of the Trump administration's normal, full immigration deportation proceedings can proceed with this ruling and most of the Supreme Court's rulings on this stuff under their normal authority. All this said was that in the couple hundred cases involving the invocation of the Alien Enemies Act, what the Trump administration was doing did not meet basic due process requirements. What they were doing was only giving these detained immigrants 24-hour notice that they were being detained and removed under the Alien Enemies Act, and only 24 hours to challenge that and provide proof that, hey, I do have a documentation or I do have a legitimate claim to stay, but no information on how they are supposed to contest that or do that while they are detained and behind bars. The court just ruled that the Trump administration may be allowed to use the Alien Enemies Act to do these deportations. They haven't reached the final conclusion on that yet, but that is not enough of a basic procedural fairness and due process. So they sent it back down to the lower courts to flesh out exactly what that has to look like in perhaps a little bit more detail. Maybe they might have to have a week's notice. Maybe they might have to have 2 weeks' notice. Maybe they might have to be able to access an immigration attorney and have a chance to file an appeal or a petition. But they're still being detained. First of all, they don't have to be released, and they can still be removed, just not in literally 24 hours. And we're, again, only talking about a couple hundred immigrants here, not the whole state of Trump's mass deportation agenda. Honestly, this clip really just made me wonder whether Matt had any idea what he was talking about. But it's the next part of his segment where he calls for something breathtakingly radical that surprised me because I don't even really consider it very conservative. We're going to get into that after this. I know my audience doesn't want to end up like this.
Just a reminder that I am very fat and very sexy, and I am 100% glorifying obesity. And there's nothing you can do.
That's why I'm excited to tell you about Lumen, the world's first handheld metabolic coach. It's an amazing device that measures your metabolism through your breath. And on the app, it lets you know if you're burning fat or carbs and even gives you tailored guidance to improve your nutrition, workout, sleep, and even stress management. This is so important because your metabolism is at the center of everything your body does. Optimal metabolic health translates to a ton of benefits, including easier weight management, better fitness results, better sleep, and improved energy levels. So if you want to take the next step in improving your health, go to lumen.me/Brad. That's lumen.me/Brad to get 15% off your Lumen. Thank you, Lumen, for sponsoring today's episode. So let's take a listen to the next clip from Matt's show.
Trump should ignore it. That's the only answer. The Supreme Court doesn't have the authority to tell the president that he can't deport illegal aliens. They don't have the authority to set policy on how that is carried out. They don't have any authority to do that. I mean, it's nice that they've given their opinion. So the Supreme Court has given their personal opinion that they think, if you're going to deport an illegal alien, they should get more than 24 hours notice. So that's their personal opinion. Thanks for letting us know, guys. Really interesting. I'm glad you chimed in. Really interesting opinion. Thanks for that. Anyway, let's get back to deporting the illegal aliens. Like that has to be the answer, because they don't have the authority. So Trump should just ignore them. And what are they going to do about it? What are they going to do about it? There's no enforcement mechanism. They can't compel him to do anything. So ignore them. Where does that lead? What happens? I don't know. But this comes to a head. It's time for this to come to a head. The judicial branch thinks that it can usurp the authority of the executive branch. And the only way to put a check on this madness, the only way to shut down this power grab by the judicial branch is to disregard them and dare them to try and do anything about it.
Wow. So this really is kind of a breathtakingly radical stance to take, especially for a conservative. And I'll get into that in a minute. But what he's calling for is for the Trump administration to defy the Supreme Court, to go full Andrew Jackson and simply say, we are not going to respect the legitimacy or authority of binding rulings from the highest court. And he is correct that technically they don't have enforcement power. But presidents have, in modern history, simply deferred to their decisions out of respect for our system of checks and balances, even when those decisions cut against their agenda. President Biden, for example, had many aspects of his policies struck down by the Supreme Court, including his attempt at a COVID-19 vaccine mandate, his so-called eviction moratorium, and a bunch of other things. And in every case, love him or hate him, and I thought he really abused his executive power to enact those policies, he abided by the decision. Even in the much discussed Supreme Court's decision striking down Biden's student loan programs, where conservatives and Republicans will sometimes claim Biden defied the Supreme Court, he actually didn't. The specific program that the Supreme Court struck down, Biden abandoned. and did not move forward with, he then tried other ways of canceling student debt. So at most you could say he tried to work around the Supreme Court, but that is allowed. That is within the bounds of the normal system. And then there were further court cases challenging the legality of those programs, to which Biden did adhere to the decisions that came from them. So the thing about this is, even if you agree with wanting Trump to be able to deport these people quicker, if you set the standard with Trump as president that you can just ignore the Supreme Court, even one that, if anything, is controlled by conservative justices and is biased probably in a Republican direction. So the fact that they're ruling against Trump should, if anything, probably prompt some introspection, like, maybe Trump's wrong on the law. This isn't some obstructionist liberal court, to be very clear. But if Trump were to follow Matt's advice and just openly defy the Supreme Court in this kind of fashion, you would essentially be blowing up our system of checks and balances. You would be setting a precedent that the judicial branch can no longer constrain executive actions, and the next time a Democrat is president and they do illegal or unconstitutional things and the Supreme Court rules that way, they can just similarly say they think the decision is wrong and not follow it. Why would you ever want to go down that path as a conservative who's supposed to want to conserve American institutions and our constitutional order and our systems of checks and balances? It almost sounds like Matt Walsh is not a conservative, but like a radical who wants to burn down the system. That's not my understanding of what conservatism is supposed to be or mean. And also, really? Over this? Over speeding up the deportation of like 200 people. You would burn the whole system to the ground rather than just keep them in detention and wait weeks or maybe even months to deport them and comply with this ruling. There's something so intemperate and radical about that. And there's just so little thought seemingly given to the implications of it that I really find it breathtaking. And again, it's just all rooted on some pretty serious misunderstandings, like what Matt said in this next clip.
Also, just on this this due process thing for a moment, the Supreme Court is concerned about the due process rights of illegal aliens, and this is what we hear all the time now from the left about the due process. First of all, illegal aliens have no legal rights in this country at all. I mean, they're not citizens. The Constitution does not cover them. The Constitution of the United States of America is for the United States of America. It's not for the entire world. The Constitution doesn't apply to every far-flung corner of the planet. It's for Americans.
Oh, in this part, Matt's just basically factually incorrect. Obviously, illegal immigrants don't have the same legal rights as citizens. There are levels and distinctions to this, but there is ample Supreme Court precedent establishing that they are entitled to some legal rights under our Constitution, and even just the very language of the Constitution itself makes that clear. 5th and 14th Amendment, for example, both say that persons are entitled to due process of law and to not be deprived of their liberty or their property and so on, or their life without due process of law. They do not say citizens, and that was an intentional choice by the people who wrote this document. So anybody present in the United States does have some degree of due process rights. You also don't have to take my word for it. I mean, the very famous conservative Supreme Court justice, the late Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, was asked about this by an interviewer once, alongside his friend Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the liberal justice, and he very much agreed that they are entitled to the 5 freedoms, which he's referring to, constitutional rights like due process. Take a listen to this clip.
Do undocumented immigrants have the 5 freedoms?
Oh, I think so. I think anybody who's present in the United States has protections under the United States Constitution.
The 14th Amendment, it doesn't speak of citizens, as some constitutions grant rights to citizens, but our Constitution says persons. And the person is every person who is here, documented or undocumented.
So what Matt is suggesting here is contradicted by like a very plain reading of the text of the Constitution itself, by many Supreme Court cases establishing that there is some degree of constitutional rights afforded to immigrants or illegal immigrants, even though it's not the same amount of legal rights as citizens, and even by the likes of Antonin Scalia. But go off, I guess. He really doesn't seem to understand the criticism or the pushback here as well. I mean, take a listen to this clip.
I mean, so the idea is if we deport an illegal alien who arrived here from Honduras last week, then there's nothing stopping them from also deporting me to my ancestral homeland where my distant relatives lived generations ago. Is that the idea? Really? I mean, it's like saying that the laws against bank robbery would mean that, like, if we enforce the law against bank robbery, it would also mean that if you go to the bank with a withdrawal slip to legally withdraw money from your checking account, that you might also go to jail for bank robbery.
So to me, a good test of whether somebody understands an issue is how well can they articulate the opposing view. And Matt Walsh clearly fails that test here because, one, nobody is talking about whether or not these people can be deported. Everyone agrees that Venezuelan illegal immigrants, especially if they're in gangs, but even if they're not, can be deported. It's a question of how can they be deported. And the argument is simply that apprehending people, detaining them with 24 hours notice, then sending them out of the country with no information, allowing them to challenge this or prove that I'm actually not an illegal immigrant, I'm a legal immigrant with a green card or with a work visa, or heck, I'm a United States citizen. The argument is that if you're deporting people in that way with that little process, one, that violates their rights to basic due process and fairness, and two, people who shouldn't be deported will be swept up in that. And we've already seen that happen many times over the years in our immigration system. The Government Accountability Office found that from 2015 through 2020, ICE agents arrested 674, detained 121, and removed 70 potential U.S. citizens. And that was all under the traditional process, not this expedited, Alien Enemies Act quick removal. So mistakes can happen, which is why you have to have some basic semblance of process. I don't understand what's so hard about that to understand. For his bank robbery analogy, the real analogy there would be, well, if we prosecute actual bank robbers in ways that don't give them a fair chance to protest their innocence, then people who don't rob banks may be charged with it mistakenly and found guilty of crimes they didn't commit. Something that has happened many times in our criminal justice system where people are prosecuted wrongly or convicted of crimes and later exonerated. There's just one final clip of Matt that I want to talk about. Take a listen to this where he kind of wraps things up.
And it's all about, as we know, they don't care about due process or putting a process in place. What they want is they're trying to throw roadblocks into the middle of the process. They want to prevent the process. They want to sabotage a process, not, instate one.
So that might be true for some of the left-wing immigration advocates who are bringing cases and challenging this stuff. They really don't want mass deportations. And, fair enough. But that is absolutely not true about the current conservative majority Supreme Court. In fact, I think the same day Matt recorded this episode, maybe the day after, the Supreme Court released another ruling allowing one of the Trump administration's mass deportation programs to continue, where they revoked status that was granted temporary status by the Biden administration to a huge group of immigrants from Venezuela. As the New York Times reports, a federal judge had blocked the administration's plan to remove the temporary protected status of more than 300,000 immigrants. The Supreme Court just allowed Trump to lift that, setting the stage and the green light for him to deport many of these people because they're not just obstructionists. They're not just obstructing him for its own sake. They genuinely are upholding their view of the Constitution and the rule of law. And that's why it's so nonsensical to suggest that we should tear up our whole system, even when conservatives control the Supreme Court, in what? Like a temper tantrum about impatience in achieving tiny percentages of deportations now, not months or weeks from now. The whole thing is so bizarre to me and kind of an indictment of this form of media that I do participate in, to be clear, this YouTube podcast commentary sphere. It's like the incentives are always towards being more radical and angry and extreme because that gets you attention and gets you clicks. And it's why Matt Walsh has, 20 times as many subscribers as me or what it may be. But you can't do that so far that you leave logic, principle, and common sense behind. At least, in my view, you really shouldn't. What do you guys think? Do you agree with me? Do you agree with Matt? do let me know in the comments below. Do hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed if you aren't yet. Remember to check out my merch, linked in the description. We just dropped a new line of items featuring the "I'm on my last brain cell" thing that I say all the time on this show. And check out my second channel, linked in the description, where I'm uploading bonus content and my TV appearances. Plus, send me voice notes for my Friday episodes where I react to your woke horror stories and your personal dilemmas and give you my take and my advice. The link to that is in the description as well. Up next, you hate to see it when somebody plays stupid games and wins stupid prizes. But that is exactly what happened to the radical woke mayor of Chicago when he said this at a recent event this past weekend. Take a listen, and warning, guys, this is a crazy thing to say out loud.
Some detractors that will push back on me and say, the only thing that the mayor talks about is the hiring of black people. No, what I'm saying is when you hire our people, we always look out for everybody else. We are the most generous people on the planet. I don't know too many cultures that have play cousins. That's how generous we are. We just make somebody a family member, right? This is how we are. And so business and economic neighborhood development, the deputy mayor is a black woman. Department of Planning and Development is a black woman. Infrastructure deputy mayor is a black woman. Chief operations officer is a black man. Budget director is a black woman. Senior advisor is a black man. And I'm laying that out because when you ask, how do we ensure that our people get a chance to grow?
So this woke progressive mayor actually just suggested that black people are more generous than other races. No, they're just people like anybody else, and individuals can be greedy or great or kind or mean. It's like bizarre racial stereotyping going on here. And then he's bragging about all the black people he's appointed to, his city government, which, if those are the best people for the job, great. But he just kind of said that he is staffing his team with black people because he thinks they're like somehow superior to others, which, one, is a wild thing to admit. Two, is not true. Everybody is created equal, and all races should be equal in society and under the law. And just imagine if a white mayor said the opposite. Like, that would be a national scandal. And this really should be too. It is fine to support, us living in a pluralistic and diverse society. I do, absolutely. I think we should be respectful of people of all backgrounds, treat everyone fairly, treat everyone the same. But this progressive vision of like a pro-identity, active pro-minority discrimination, or even stereotyping in the opposite direction is not progressive at all. It seems like deeply toxic and divisive and radical and regressive. And it's almost certainly illegal. This mayor went up on that stage and bragged about this, and now he's being investigated by the Department of Justice. The New York Times reports that the Justice Department says it will investigate Chicago after the mayor's remarks about black hires. The Trump administration said on Monday that it had opened a civil rights investigation into the city of Chicago to see if its mayor or others had engaged in a pattern of discrimination by hiring a number of black people to senior positions. The Justice Department's Civil Rights Division posted on social media a letter it sent to Chicago's mayor, Brandon Johnson, quoting remarks he made Sunday at a local church in which he praised the number of black people in top city jobs. So this is just an investigation, and maybe they look into it and there's no there, and he didn't openly discriminate against anyone. He just happened to hire the best people for the job for all these roles he listed, and in every case it was a black person. Maybe that's the truth. I don't know what the truth is, but I certainly think when you're this open and brazen about it, and it is illegal to discriminate on the basis of race or gender or anything else on the basis of these protected characteristics under civil rights law, it is absolutely illegal to do that in government hiring. And it's worthy of at least looking into in a fair and objective investigation. And if that's what this is, it shouldn't be like a politicized witch hunt or anything. But if that's what it is, then I support that. Because let's be so for real. It is not some right-wing conspiracy theory to suspect that in institutions or organizations controlled by ultra left-wing progressives, anti-white or anti-male or whatever, different forms of discrimination have occurred. I mean, we've covered on this show businesses and even colleges and government organizations where they've been busted for specifically saying, we're only looking to hire a woman of color for this role, which is incredibly illegal, not allowed. But they put it in writing. Journalist Jesse Singal wrote a great article that I'll link to titled, "Of Course Liberal Institutions Are Engaging in Illegal Hiring Practices on the Basis of Race." He says this will turn out to have been a very bad idea. He explains that if you work inside liberal media or government or nonprofit organizations, it has been just made clear at times that in certain roles, they're not looking to hire a white person. People either didn't seem to realize how illegal that was, or they did, and that's why they didn't always put those requests in writing. Washington Post journalist Megan McArdle similarly wrote on Twitter, "I've talked about this with lawyers because I've been repeatedly surprised when folks I didn't know very well would openly say to me that they were looking to hire a woman of color for X position. I understood that this was illegal. They very clearly did not." I don't know for sure whether the city government of Chicago is guilty of this or not, but I do think it should be investigated. But I think it's undeniable that some institutions and organizations have engaged in this kind of discrimination, and it's not legal, it's not moral, and it's not okay. There should be a reckoning. People should be held to account for it. And I think now that we have a Republican-led Department of Justice and its Civil Rights Division that actually wants to look into this stuff, rather than the Biden administration, which I think would probably turn a blind eye to a lot of this, I think they may go looking for it, and they might come up with a lot of very damning receipts, because I imagine that what some of these folks like Megan and Jesse are saying is probably true, and that a lot of these institutions and organizations were brazen about their illegal discrimination in ways that wasn't very smart, because they felt kind of invincible because these laws weren't being enforced, and it felt like culturally it was moving in this DEI direction. But now, even just a few years later, when those emails get subpoenaed and those Slack messages get brought in as court evidence, I think there's going to be some serious skeletons in a lot of people's closets, and I support accountability for where this stuff has been allowed to fester, because it's not just illegal. I mean, I really do think it's immoral and wrong to discriminate against people on the basis of their immutable characteristics in any direction. And I think most tragically, it reinforces the divides between these groups and racial strife and gender wars and all this stuff, where I think most Americans like me want to live in a world where this stuff fades into the background and isn't the defining aspect of our lives, and we're not so sharply divided into these groups. Well, reverse discrimination, just as much as old-fashioned discrimination, makes that dream less and less realistic. So I support it being cracked down upon, but you let me know what you think in the comments. Up next, we got to check in with the UK, because they are not okay. I mean, this latest censorship story, this latest free speech nightmare out of the UK, guys, well, we're going to take a listen to some reporting from GB News, the right-leaning news source over in the UK. But honestly, this is just dystopian.
Extraordinary breaking news, which you just heard there from San Francis. Lucy Connolly, she's the wife of a Conservative councillor. Her appeal against the 31-month sentence for putting out an intemperate tweet in the aftermath of the Southport murders has been dismissed, so she will remain in prison. She's not particularly. She's.
Let's just have a minute to think about this country, right? This is a mother who has now got 284 days to remain away from her child and her husband, and who knows, her parents, maybe her extended family, because she wrote one angry post on social media. And she also says that this is because she herself was suffering from bereavement. Yeah. Tell you what she said. This was in the wake of the stabbings in Southport. Her post read on X, Twitter, "Mass deportation now. Set fire to all the bleep hotels full of bleeps for all I care. If that makes me racist, so be it." It was up for about 3.5 hours. It was viewed 300,000 times. She thought, that was probably a mistake, wasn't it? I let my anger get in the way. Yeah. She deleted it.
31 months in jail, nearly 3 years.
The implication being of this...
Prison's being overflowing, by the way.
What does it mean if you live in a country where you can't express your views, no matter how unpalatable they might be to other people? That you can literally have a knock on the door, you get arrested, you get put into prison, you get taken away from your children. What good does this do other than to tell you at home, keep your voices shut, wind your necks in? I don't want you to say what you think. This is what this government are telling us.
Wow. Just wow. Nearly 3 years in jail for an angry and unhinged tweet. That is not something that happens in a free country or in a country with any semblance of free speech, y'all. It is simply not. To be clear, her tweet was wrong. You should never, and this clearly I don't think was meant literally, it was meant in an inflammatory and hyperbolic way. You should never call for violence in any way, no matter how upset you are about, in this case, it was in the aftermath of a tragic crime that I think they believed to be committed by an illegal immigrant. It turned out not to be. But anyway, it was this passionate thing. She deleted just a few hours after she posted it. It was wrong. It was irresponsible. Maybe she should have been banned from Twitter from it or faced some sort of civil consequence, like in society. Maybe she could have gotten pushback from friends and family saying, like, you went too far, delete this. But the idea that it is a criminal matter or that somebody would be put behind bars for years simply because of, like the host said, an intemperate or angry tweet in the aftermath of a tragedy, that is dystopian. That is Orwellian. And I know that stuff gets overused and people are like very quick to say that, but it really is. And it's not just this one woman. This is a widespread phenomenon in the United Kingdom. Our cultural neighbors, who at least historically had a proud tradition in their common law of free speech and open in an open society, well, they've now gone this really disturbing and dark path. And there's extensive reporting on this. I've talked about it on the show before, of hundreds and even thousands of people being investigated, charged, and in some cases imprisoned over social media posts. Like, there's such a clear chilling effect from that in a democratic society where everyone's supposed to voice their views, supposed to hash it all out, and then may the best idea win. You can't do that when people are afraid to speak in anger or in passion because they might end up going to jail for years. We're not even talking about paying a fine and like getting in trouble and having to go to court. We're talking about multiple years in prison. And I mean, I am more sympathetic because she's a mother, she has kids she'll miss out on. Legally, that's not really relevant because, I mean, if two people commit the same crime, it should be the same punishment regardless of their personal circumstances. But it does make you feel worse for the woman just personally. And this is what I always come back to with these crazy stories. Like, to some extent, I'm like, wow. And I just marvel at the insane nature of it all across the pond. But I always come back to this important truth. This would absolutely happen in some blue states in America, or maybe in some red states on some other issues, if we did not have a First Amendment that was robustly upheld by our legal system. It's not perfect, doesn't always do the job, but by and large, it ensures that this kind of dystopian thing could never happen in the United States. And for that, it should be cherished and jealously protected and defended from people on either side who would chip away at it. Or we could very well end up just a few years down the road with situations like this happening in our country. And that's not something I ever want to see happen. All right, guys, that'll be it for today's episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Please do make sure to subscribe. If you aren't yet, do hit that like button before you go. Let me know your thoughts on today's episode in the comments. Do remember to check out my second bonus channel, send in voice notes, check out the merch, yada, 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 and we'll talk again real soon.